The Adventurous Princess, the Unicorn and the Sorcerer. Children's Tale. Written by C.P. Bott. Princess Fernanda was a very happy girl. She was the youngest of the royal family of the faraway and beautiful kingdom of Fiesterdon. She used to laugh out loud almost all the time, enjoyed life to the fullest, and had many friends. She loved to be surrounded by people. She was also a bit daring. Sometimes she did not obey her parents, King Hercules and Queen Charlotte, often causing them some headaches. Her parents and her older sister, Princess Sophie, loved Princess Fernanda very much and did everything they could to keep their young Fernanda safe, despite her naughtiness. Whenever she got in trouble, someone came to her rescue. Kindly, Queen Charlotte used to tell her, "Dear daughter, you must learn to take care of yourself. We will not always be able to get you out of trouble." Fernanda looked at her with her big eyes and nodded, but did not say a word about it. She thought that in order to have fun, she should be very bold. Princess Fernanda was never bored. She had 3 playrooms. The one with the talking dolls, the one with the magical fairies, and a new one with terrifying monsters that she had recently asked her parents to build. She also had a room only for drawing and another one for music. They were so wonderful that every day she invited her friends to play in one of them. So much fun was better if she could share it. Her favorite room was the monster playroom, which was really spooky. Some of her friends were very scared of it. Not the princess, though, who laughed with each growl of the monsters and the cries of fear from her friends. The funniest one, Fernanda used to say, was her friend George, who asked to play in the monster playroom every day, and he would always come out green with fear, saying that he would never go in there again. And the next day, wham! Ready again for the monster playroom. Princess Sophie was 10 years older than Fernanda. Although they used to like different things, they were best friends and enjoyed spending long hours together. Sometimes they read stories. Sophie loved to read, especially tales of knights and princesses. Fernanda listened with interest, but when it was her turn to read, she preferred dragons and magical creatures. Sophie, same as her parents, always told Fernanda that she should take care of herself and be a little more careful with her games. The princess had suffered some accidents she had considered minor. Nevertheless, her family was always worried about her. At that time, when she wanted to brush the teeth of the kingdom's army dragon, it burned one of her braids by accident, and her hair finished long on one side and short on the other. Or that other time, when she was practicing acrobatics standing up on her faithful flying unicorn. She fell off and ended with a cast on her arm. Fernanda also spent a lot of time with her unicorn, Pliny. It was small, just like a pony, with a long mane, which got messy with the wind while flying. It was white as snow and glowed both at night and day. Fernanda spent long hours a day flying all over the kingdom with the unicorn. She confessed him her dreams and deepest desires. He was a faithful friend. Pliny, of course, could only listen because he could not speak, or so she thought. But she knew he understood her. In addition, Princess Fernanda always felt protected when she was with her magical unicorn, Pliny. Fernanda had enjoyed a life full of intense emotions. In her short life, she had seen great wizards doing amazing acts. She had visited, together with her family, distant lands of fairies and goblins. She had received the most exquisite and unusual gifts, one of which was her unicorn Pliny. She had known and owned so many things, yet She was just about to be 10 years old. 10 days before Princess Fernanda's birthday, King Hercules asked her what she wanted as a birthday gift. "I want to go to the land of the giants, father," Fernanda said without hesitation. "Daughter, you know that's the only wish I cannot grant you," said the king affectionately. "But father, you always say, for the king, there's nothing impossible," Fernanda cried. "Dear daughter, this is all about being careful. It's about taking care of ourselves and our people. We haven't had good experiences with the giants. They have put guards and traps to prevent us from approaching their land. It's not possible." "But father, if everyone enjoys being with us, why should giants refuse to—" The king interrupted her before she could finish. "I cannot allow you to endanger, or even worse, threaten our kingdom just to please you. The answer is no, and we won't talk about it anymore." Fernanda had had this conversation with her father several times before. The answer was always the same. She did not understand why a person would not like to have friends, much less friends as the inhabitants of Fiesterdam, who are so cheerful and happy. Sometimes she thought that he exaggerated to protect his family. It could not be that serious. So stubborn and bold was she, Fernanda would not give up so easily. Sophie had told her about the guardians of the giants. One of them was Gargolo, who lived alone on the outskirts of the land of the giants. They said that Gargolo did not even like the other giants, and that if he caught someone snooping around his home, he would lock them in a dungeon and wouldn't let them out ever again. He must be a very grumpy giant. The second guard was a sorcerer who could read people's minds. No one knew his name, nor could recognize him, because he disguised himself and changed forms and names. He bewitched those who approached the land of the giants and managed to get them trapped into Gargolo's dungeons. Everyone had warned her about the dangers of approaching the land of the giants. Fernanda, however, wanted to know how they were and find out all of the truth about those stories. That afternoon, as she did her daily walk, she thought, "To get to the land of the giants, I must only be careful not to meet Gargolo or the sorcerer." She looked at Pliny. Her eyes sparkled and she said, "I have an idea. If we fly high, very high, above the clouds where the giants cannot reach, I could go over Gargolo's house and get to the land of the giants. The sorcerer should not be a problem at that height." Pliny stared at her with wide eyes. He seemed shocked or frightened, but as always, he would accompany her wherever she wanted to. He would not leave her alone. "It is decided, Pliny. We will leave tomorrow morning. That way we will be back in the afternoon, and no one will notice or even miss us gone." Suddenly, it got very cold, and the sky clouded over. At that time, the wind began to blow hard, and a light rain started, wetting Fernanda's long brown braids. It seemed as if the sky were saddened by the princess's decision. Fernanda did not pay attention to the signs of heaven. She only thought about reaching the land of the giants. So many things she had known, she could not live without seeing at least one giant. She took Pliny to its barn and ran towards the palace. Dinner was served. Fernanda ate only an apple, took a few rolls to her room, and told her family that she was going to sleep early. "Are you going to sleep now? Do you feel good?" Sophie said, surprised. Fernanda never slept early. "I'm all right. Today I played a lot and I'm a little tired." "May you rest, sister," said Sophie with a weary tone. "Good night," Fernanda said with a smirk on her face, before running off to her room to refine her plans for the next day. Sophie, who knew her sister very well, suspected something was going on. She had dinner early too and hurried to the stable. Sophie was a 20-year-old peerless beauty. She was preparing to be a queen someday. She was tall, with snow-white skin, big brown eyes, and long brown hair, as Fernanda, but she wore loose hair, waist-long. She only decorated her head with a small turquoise shiny tiara. It was her favorite color. She hurried to the stable. Her breath sounded fast and agitated. "It is colder than usual," she thought. She suddenly stopped in front of Pliny's stable and said, "My dear and faithful Pliny, I have a bad feeling about what Fernanda intends to do this time, and I'm afraid I will not be there to protect her. On behalf of all the adventures we have lived together, please tell me what she's planning."
Her Highness Sophie, what a relief to see you come.
Pliny spoke, and the princess was not surprised. Actually, she was the only one who knew that Pliny could speak. Until 10 years ago, before taking care of Fernanda, Pliny was Sophie's protector. They loved each other and were inseparable. Thus, Pliny told Sophie that he could not only speak, but could guess the future as well, and like him, all unicorns could. Beautiful places they met together. They flew through clouds, and secretly the unicorn took Sophie to know his homeland. Sophie's eyes opened widely to contemplate such beauty. Fortunately, they were not discovered by any unicorn. Otherwise, Pliny would have suffered the terrible punishment of being dismissed from the mission that he was assigned to in this life. Pliny came from the magical land of the unicorns, where they all come from. No man, woman, or magician had ever been in that enchanted land where only unicorns could go. It was full of waterfalls, rivers, and colorful flowers, and had an eternal scent of sweet fruit. Hundreds of unicorns lived happily in that place, where the sun always shined and it never rained. Unicorns are special magical beings because they are the protectors of Earth and humans. Each one at birth is assigned and trained for a mission. Pliny, as soon as he was prepared, was taken by his parents to the royal family. Unicorns knew that King Hercules and Queen Charlotte would be, for many years, wise and good rulers as their daughters. They had to take care of them for the well-being of their people. When the youngest of the royal family was born, Pliny asked Sophie to put him in charge of Princess Fernanda, who would need loads of protection. That was how Sophie, in a loving and generous act, gave her faithful pet to her beloved and newborn sister.
Her Highness Sophie, I must tell you something very urgent. Only in you I can entrust this big secret. You must promise you will not tell any of this to Princess Fernanda or anyone. The fate that awaits her should not be modified.
You know that you can count on my trust and discretion, my dear and loyal friend Pliny. I knew there was something strange about Fernanda's behavior. Please, tell me everything, Sophie asked worriedly. Pliny told Sophie Fernanda's whole plan. When he finished, he stared at her with his intense blue eyes and said very wisely,
Princess Fernanda is taking a big risk this time. Despite all the warnings from the family, this time she should fully assume the consequences of her actions without any help. Her future will depend on her decisions.
Pliny, but what if something happens?
You read the future. What will happen to my sister? Princess Fernanda can make a decision that will make her either the happiest or the unhappiest child on earth. If she chooses to take care of herself, she will achieve the best. If she decides to risk more than necessary, I am afraid there will be nothing to do. Pliny was very sad, but he knew that the fate of the princess would be fulfilled on this trip. This time, there was nothing he could do. Everything was in Princess Fernanda's hands. In order for the princess to become a good queen in the future and make wise decisions, she must learn to be careful and to listen to the warnings of those who love her the most. The unicorn said. Pliny, please, Sophie cried, but she should trust on his faithful friend's wisdom. Unicorns are the protectors of all human beings. We will protect them from real threats, not the harm they cause to themselves. Humans must know how to look after themselves and not get into unnecessary trouble. We will take care of them as long as they want to be protected and safe. So what will you do? I will take Fernanda where she asks me to. I will go with her. I trust you, my dear friend. I will be here praying and waiting for you. The next day, Fernanda left her room just before dawn. Sophie, who had not slept all night, heard the sound of the door closing. She lingered a few minutes, fighting with her inner self. She knew she should not, but could not stand it, and ran to the barn to warn her sister. Princess Fernanda was already riding her unicorn. Sophie ran with all her might. She screamed as loud as she could, as soon as she saw that her sister was already taking off. Fernanda! Do not go, please! Fernanda! Fernanda did not see or hear her. She went flying high towards the snowy mountains and to the land of the giants. Princess Sophie wept inconsolably and prayed for the welfare of her sister. She only had the consolation of the great confidence she had in her guardian unicorn. The air at that height was very cold, and it became difficult to breathe. The long violet cape the princess wore was not enough to protect her from the cold. The long braids were not madly moved by the breeze anymore. They were all stiff and frozen instead. She could barely move her hands, which were already purple. With great difficulty, she spoke. We must get down. Pliny, we are freezing, Fernanda said, shivering from the cold. Pliny immediately dropped to a slightly warmer height. He thought to himself, now we must be close to Gargolo's house. This is not good. They were at a dangerous height, as they could be easily reached by the giants. Fernanda knew it, but higher they would freeze. She had not counted on that when making her plan. Anyway, she decided to continue. Pliny was very worried, but followed the instruction of her mistress. Suddenly, they saw something in the sky approaching at full speed. "Watch out, Pliny!" Fernanda shouted. The unicorn twirled, zigzagged up and down, right, then left. Fernanda hugged the neck of her faithful friend and closed her eyes. The giant eagle was relentless. It was not going to give up. It wanted to take Fernanda. It quickly passed that first time, grabbed the tip of the long cape, which got torn by the huge sharp nails. It failed. Immediately, the bird attacked again. This time,
It caught and held Fernanda from her back. Fernanda and Pliny were separated in the air. She did her best to keep her arms tied to the unicorn's neck. She used all the strength she could. "Help me, Pliny!" They did their best to prevent this huge eagle, twice the size of the unicorn, from carrying the princess away. Pliny fought, kicked, screamed. Suddenly, a red beam coming out of the bright and dark eyes of his attacker blinded him. At that time, the unicorn knew it was not an ordinary eagle. It was the Sorcerer. Pliny could not move his wings anymore and could not complete the movement that would take them away from the fierce bird. So he ended up losing his balance completely and rolled over several times, falling into the void. Fernanda witnessed the terrible accident, while the eagle carried her in its claws towards an unknown location. At that time, she lost consciousness. She opened her eyes and found herself in a place of towering dark walls. It had a huge metal door. There were no windows. The room was very dark. Only a torch at the top of the wall could poorly light the cell where she was. "This must be a dungeon for giants," she thought. There was no furniture, and it was very cold. She wrapped herself the best she could with the remains of her cape, torn by the eagle's claws. She did not know how long it had been since the accident. She knew she had lost her friend Pliny and that she was completely alone, for the first time in her life. She felt guilty about what had happened to her friend and for being in that cell. She did not know what to do. The door opened just a little. She got up and wanted to run to escape. Then she realized that something was anchoring one of her feet. She was tied to a shackle. She was frightened when someone's shadow, small like an elf, came in. It was smaller than her. He carried a dish in his hands. His eyes were bright red. Fernanda thought that they looked a little like the eyes of the evil eagle that caught her. She was afraid. The elf approached Fernanda. He smiled and spoke in verse. "Audacious and beautiful princess, you like adventure and excitement. I bring magic sweets for your kingliness. Take one and you'll have action and enchantment." "Who are you? Where am I? Why am I tied up? Where is my unicorn?" "Calmly, lucky princess. All your questions I will answer one by one. Your friend I want to be. You do not have to fear. With these sweets, you will again feel free." The princess did not trust the elf. If he wanted to be her friend, why would he lock her and tie her up in a cold dungeon? Now she was alone and in danger, and she knew she had the responsibility to distinguish by herself between good and evil. For the first time, she understood that everything her family said to her was for her good sake. They had always wanted to protect her. If only she had understood that before. Now she was out alone and in big trouble. She thought she heard her sister. "Do not take those sweets. Take care, sister." "Answer me now," the princess shouted. "I do not want your sweets." The little elf frowned slowly. His eyes shone more intensely. He stared at her. Fernanda felt she could not stop looking at him if she tried. The elf began to change shape. His mouth became a pig. White feathers appeared on its skin. The eagle, she thought. In a few seconds, the feathers disappeared. The small body grew and grew. His hands were so big now that with one hand he could certainly lift her by the waist. The eyes were the same bright eyes, but larger. Now he was a giant. Gargolo, the sorcerer! Fernanda realized that the hermit giant, the sorcerer, the eagle, and the elf were the same person. Where did I get myself into? The princess said to herself. The giant sat on a corner of the cell. He did not speak. Nevertheless, with only a look from him, Fernanda knew she should not move. The princess decided to remain calm, observe quietly, and wait for the first opportunity to escape, if she could. The sorcerer had not yet decided what to do with the princess. On the one hand, he wanted to keep her locked up forever, but on the other, he also knew that for her sake, the king would give him anything he asked for. For the king, there was nothing impossible. Suddenly, he spoke, again in verse, smiling, rubbing one palm of his hand against the other. What wonder will I request? Every existing exquisiteness, dominance and brightness, maybe the title of a knight brave, or shall I leave you as my prisoner until my old age? After a long while contemplating the curious pattern of Fernanda's braids, the giant fell asleep and began to snore very loudly. Fernanda realized that her chains allowed her to reach where his head was. She saw the dish with the sweets that he had left at her feet. Nothing good for sure could I expect from these, she reflected. She also thought that if she gave him the sweets one by one, the giant sorcerer would suffer the effects of the evil she got herself saved from. Maybe those sweets would eventually be her salvation. She did not know what these magic sweets' effect would do to the sorcerer, but it was her only chance to escape. She had to try. She took the sweets and stretched the most she could to reach the mouth of the giant. His breath stank. Fernanda had to use all of her strength not to be pushed away by his strong snores. She held her breath and placed one by one the 3 sweets in his enormous mouth. They were now too small for his size, but she hoped that it would work. The sleeping giant took his tongue out and licked his lips. One of the 3 sweets fell out due to one of the snores of the evil sleeper. Fernanda was able to catch it in the air and return it again to his mouth. The giant licked again, but this time swallowed the sweets. Fernanda returned to her place, pushed by a last snore. She waited. She pressed hard her hands and teeth as if anticipating what would happen. Nothing happened for a while. Fernanda thought about what she had just done. Maybe these sweets won't do anything to the sorcerer. If he realizes what I have done, will he take revenge? Will I be able to escape? In the end, she thought again, it was the only thing she could do. She had to act, or who knows what her future would become. Soon, the giant opened his eyes. His face was unsmiling. He no longer showed the grim smile, like a while ago. His eyes did not shine, but opened very wide. He stared at Fernanda, but did not say a word. She did not know what was happening, but decided to speak. "Free me now from these chains, sorcerer!" The giant approached with his big, clumsy fingers and tried to grab the key that opened the padlock, but they were too large. He could not open it. Fernanda said, "Become an elf again." Immediately, the giant changed into an elf again. His eyes were still not shining. "Now open the padlock and get me out of this cell." The princess understood that the sweets had an effect on the giant, who was acting as bewitched. He did everything that she asked. She thought about Pliny. "Take me to my unicorn." They left the cell and took a path towards the giant's forest. The sorcerer walked with his arms hanging at the sides, barely moving. For a moment, the princess was distracted by the wonders around her in this world of giants. The trees were really huge and beautiful. They had such enormous fruits that only one of them could feed a whole family for breakfast, she thought. She focused again on her steps. She did not know how long the effect of those sweets would last. She had to hurry up as soon as she saw Pliny. In the distance, she saw a bright white light. It had to be her unicorn. "Stay here," she told the spellbound sorcerer. Pliny had fallen into the treetops and had managed to escape, though he was still somewhat stunned by the plummeting. He had only had time to wake up and realize he was not hurt. Fernanda started running as fast as she could toward the bright light. She was afraid to look back, thinking the sorcerer would awake at any time. She was breathing heavily. The road towards Pliny seemed longer than she had thought. She suddenly fell down when a branch of a carnivorous plant caught her foot. Fernanda shouted with all her might, "Pliny! Pliny, please help me!" The plant was approaching Fernanda fast to its jaws. The unicorn recognized Fernanda's voice. He immediately tried to stand up. He stumbled a bit but stood up using all his strength. He could fly and get where the princess was trapped by the plant. Fernanda's foot was being pulled more and more to that stinky toothed mouth. The unicorn firmly bit the branch that held her. A groan was heard. The plant finally released her. "Pliny, my faithful friend, you are alive." Fernanda's voice thrilled Pliny. She was alive and well. "Let's get out of here, Pliny. Let's go home." Suddenly, a lightning grazed the head of Pliny and lit fire in the undergrowth. It was the sorcerer who seemed to have regained consciousness. "Let's go, Pliny! Fly high! Quick!" Fernanda quickly climbed the unicorn and both flew, avoiding the magical rays that went closer to them. He flew up very quickly, higher and higher. They passed above the clouds until they could see the stars. This time Fernanda did not feel cold. Pliny flew faster than ever. They could be seen in the distance just as a beam of white light across the sky. It was dark when Fernanda and Pliny reached the royal castle. She saw everything more beautiful than before. She missed her sister, her parents, her friends so much, and she had only been out one day. She realized how lucky she was. It was the presence of her loved ones what made her life exciting. Never again would Princess Fernanda leave her family and friends to go on dangerous adventures. Entering the place, Sophie ran to meet her. "Fernanda, sister, I was so worried about you. You were not caught by Gargolo or the sorcerer. I'm so happy to see you well. What happened? Why are your clothes torn and dirty?" "It turns out that Gargolo and the sorcerer are the same person. Wait, how do you know I was there?" "Sister, it does not matter how I know it. The important thing is that you're okay." Sophie made Pliny a knowing wink. "I love you, sister. Forgive me for making you worry about me. From now on,
I will be more careful with myself and others. I thought for a moment that I had lost Pliny because of my recklessness."
Fernanda told everything to Sophie, and then to their parents. Queen Charlotte said to Fernanda,
"You have learned the lesson, daughter. You were wise not to trust the sorcerer and not to take his magic sweets. You have learned to take care of yourself."
King Hercules knew to how better defend his people from the evil sorcerer, who, like Fernanda said, could be recognized by his bright eyes and his particular way of speaking. He also suspected that the giants were not evil, since Gargolo was not actually a giant. Thus, King Hercules dared to make an expedition with his best men to reach the land of the giants. He knew that the sorcerer did not allow the giants to make contact with any inhabitant of Fiestardan. Both towns then became friends. They banished the sorcerer, who never bothered them anymore. Fernanda finally met not one, but many gentle giants. She remained a happy girl who enjoyed adventure. Now she acted more carefully, and all her days were happy and exciting, because she knew that fun was in the company of her beloved ones. The end.